to mess up, but yeah. So good. Well, thank you for being here. And for those of you who are listening to the recording, I would just say while I'm thinking of it, if you have any questions that you're not able to ask because you're asynchronous, feel free to email me. My email address is on the screen. As I am a recovering lawyer. I've been in the leadership and team space for about 23 years after practicing law for a bit in Southern California in what I like to refer to as the wacky world of California litigation here in the US. I'm grateful that I'm out of that practice and now practicing other things and focus on working with teams, on team alignment, team formation, and other team-related areas of focus, as well as leadership workshops and sessions and teaching and executive coaching as well. And I'm affiliated with the Wharton School here in Philadelphia, USA, which is where I call my home. And I always like talking to Australia because I feel like you're just always ahead of me. I can ask you what's coming tomorrow and you can tell me. So thank you for that.
It's really good.
I think you may need to mute one of your two things, Carlin, please. So yeah, and we're a small group, so that's good. We could, if you want to stay on mute, you could do that. Hopefully we're all familiar with Zoom. My latest favorite feature on Zoom is to do the hide self view. If it's distracting for you to see yourself on the screen, if you're not familiar with that, if you hover your mouse over your own photo and click on the three dots, you can click hide self view and then you disappear and you may not be distracted by your own visage if that is in some way distracting for you. I like it, although as a presenter I want to be sure I'm still in the screen, so I'll keep on. So as Carlin and I were talking about this, and we thought, okay, high performance teams webinar, basics of high performance teams, what do we want to do? And Carlin had posted some really good materials, and I thought, you know, this is good, and these are not ordinary times that we're in right now. This is a different ball game that we're in here, and so I think it's useful to look at what makes a high performing team, but it's even more useful to talk about what's happening now and what do we need to do now? What do we need to do perhaps differently? Because yeah, the rule book's not out the window, but it may be on the windowsill. Let's put it that way. So let's start with objectives and approach and what we'll do here, and then get into some models, or especially one. And then the intention here was to get this into a conversation in small groups about what you think and how would we apply some of this material. As I like to say very often, and if you've been in workshops with me, you've heard me say that it's really not about what we know, it's about what we do. So let's talk about what you do or what you have seen done that's effective. That's really the focus of this particular webinar. Or for you, Joseph, it's a meeting. And when you listen to that, you'll know what that means. Okay, so, all right, I'm going to attempt to advance the slides. Did that work? I think it did.
Yes.
Good, okay. So we'll just do a quick overview of elements of high performance teams, two models, just to put some kind of a model in the room. I am a recovering lawyer, not an HR person. I did not grow up in learning and development. I am agnostic when it comes to models, although I think they're useful just to give us a place from which to begin a discussion. So if you say, hey, who is this guy? He's a teams expert, but he's not married to a model. That's right, I'm not. So we'll talk about that. Let's talk about understanding what matters now. If I could give you, anyone listening to this call, what the magic pill and the golden egg, or whatever metaphor we want to use, I would gladly provide it to you. I would charge a lot of money. I have a lot of free time, but it's not a simple formulaic thing anymore, especially under these circumstances. So this is why it's a discussion. It's not a, the all-knowing expert from on high providing the answer. Let's talk about it. We'll share what we know, and we'll have discussions about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about what next. And if there's any questions for me or for each other, we'll have time to do that. First model, which you may have seen before, is Patrick Lencioni's model of the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. This is the positive spin on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So when teams are dysfunctional, they don't have trust, they have unhealthy or toxic conflict, they don't make healthy or clear commitments, they don't hold one another accountable, and they don't get shared results. But healthy teams, according to Lencioni, rest on a foundation of trust. When people trust each other, then we can have clean conflict, not personal conflict, not unproductive conflict, not destructive conflict. But we can have good conflict, and good conflict leads to healthy commitment. If people can't weigh in, as Patrick Lencioni likes to say, they won't buy in. And we're not comfortable weighing in if we can't have healthy conflict, or if we feel like we're unsafe, or people are attacking each other. So you see that the trust leads to healthy conflict, which leads to commitment. Clear commitments lead to accountability, and the ability to hold one another accountable. Not for the team leader to be keeping score and with the yardstick, but rather to hold one another accountable. And then we can have shared results. A focus on shared results rather than individual results, and the results come clearly when the accountability is clear, commitments are clean, etc. So that's one model. Any questions about that model?
Nope.
I think it's fairly straightforward, but since it's a small group, I thought I might ask. And if you have questions, you could come back to that. And by the way, Carlin, I can't see a chat. So if anyone's chatting, I'll need you to please help, because the way my screen is set up, I can't see it. Thank you. Just in case someone has a question or something that they don't want recorded, so they don't want to speak it out loud. Okay, and the other thing that's as close to a model as I like is Google's take on the 5 essential factors that make for a high-performing team. So that means trust, the ability to express what you'd like to express, and take risks comfortably in a team environment. In other words, essentially, psychological safety. So the freedom to speak up freely. Accountability. Note the commonality between this model and the 5 behaviors model. The ability to hold team members accountable for their responsibilities and actions. And I do think that the peer accountability piece that Lencioni talks about is important. I think a high-performing team is not one that waits for the leader to revisit commitments. Transparency, clearly defined values and goals that are communicated to the whole team, so the leader's not withholding. There's no issues of agendas or secret agendas that are suspected. Meaningful work, everyone on the team feels some aspect of their work is important. That's something that's been researched and written about up and down in terms of connection to purpose, in terms of the connection of an individual's work to the organizational mission, or as I sometimes like to think of it, how my why connects to the collective why. And that may refer back to some Simon Sinek models of starting with why. And then impactful work. Everyone on the team feels their contributions have an impact. So trust, accountability, transparency, meaningful work, and impactful work. It matters. So let's look at these models a little bit. And I'd like to hear, again, with a small group, I think we can open this up here. I will first ask a question and answer it, which is what lawyers love to do. You wouldn't want to ask a question you don't know the answer to. So I would say the common theme of these models is trust. And I would purport and assert and opine, all 3 of those things, that trust is the foundation of high-performing teams. So the question then is, how do we build trust? So coming back to Google and Project Aristotle, and there's more of a discussion of this point on the Inspiring Leadership app, if you want to look at that Carlin previously posted. This is just the top line. So to build trust, we need to appreciate unique strengths. People perform at a much higher level when they feel that their strengths are being acknowledged and appreciated. Refrain from the blame. Sometimes a neutral autopsy or autopsies without blame. This is where, when we do after action reviews, we want to say, what was your thinking here, as opposed to, why did you do that? and the distinction and the nuance in the different questions that we might ask. So that can be important. So refraining from blame builds trust. I think we understand that. It's hard for us to show up and be open and vulnerable if we feel blamed. In fact, if anyone on this call has been married, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. Number 3, solicit. We can be honest here with each other. Solicit input and practice ostentatious listening. So very obvious, overt demonstrations of listening. Look for ways to listen in new ways, invite input in different ways, and then create bonding moments. And that can be anything from team meetings to literally or figuratively putting an arm around someone's shoulder appropriately, or checking in with people, asking personal questions when it's appropriate, knowing about our clients and colleagues, families, and situations that we can ask a caring question about. But authentic bonding moments build trust. And I think most of us would say that that's been our experience, if I were to make that assumption. A few other thoughts about trust. According to some research that was recently reported by Professor Willie Peterson at Columbia in New York University, we will trust a leader if these 5 things are present. They understand my needs, right? So the leader gets it. They understand what I need. That's so fundamental, and yet I don't think that gets talked about enough. Does the leader really understand what I need to be successful? Does my leader understand that? They have the skills to solve my problem, or they have access to the resources that solve my problem, I would add. They care about my success. They keep their promises, and they are truth tellers. They are truth tellers. And this particular, Carlin, we can send some links to some different resources here, put that up on the app. But this was something that was published just last month, and Peterson was talking about some particular politicians that are willing to be candid with the truth about COVID.
Interesting.
And how that engenders trust. Fairly straightforward, I think. And I'm just going to quickly check the chat and see what we've got here. Cool. Okay. Thank you, David. Great. Okay, so that's one take here. We will trust a leader if he or she does these 5 things or demonstrates these 5 things, and I think that's true. And I would also add something even a little bit more general from Mike Useem at the Wharton School, and I had to put him in here because he's a friend and I've worked with him a number of times. This is really even more foundational. 3 keys to exercising leadership regardless of our role, whether it's professional, personal, otherwise. Leadership means thinking strategically, communicating persuasively, whatever that might mean and appropriate given the circumstances, and acting decisively. And this was also a subject of a recent post as well that we can link to. Okay, so any questions or disagreements so far?
I have a little comment, which is
Please.
about that appreciation of unique strengths. I think, so we've had that as a company value for 20 years. And it's interesting to see that in action, because when you pull people back to that concept, there's a way to use that to both harness people's best aspects and also forgive them for their challenge areas. And I think that's part of what I'm seeing right now of teams under stress is that, part of the blaming behaviors is coming from looking at people derailing a little bit and not having that focus on their strengths. So I think these are very interrelated.
So it's the leader appreciating strengths, and it's also as individuals for us to recognize what our strengths are and just remember that, especially when we could easily be knocked off the rails with stress or demands or difficulty maintaining boundaries, etc. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think there's a culture that a leader can set that is a more compassionate culture, for lack of a better word. And I think it's really about, if we're appreciating each other's strengths, we're also forgiving each other's weaknesses and helping to compensate for those weaknesses.
Yeah.
Knowing that we're all human, we're all here to help each other. I think that is one of the differences I'm seeing between leaders with that sort of collaborative style that's including everyone, and leaders who are much more sort of directive and forceful, who are not getting that emotional buy-in from the team.
Right. Yeah. And there may be a place where that authoritarian style is needed, but not sustainably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. Good. Thank you, Carlin. And I'm glad that we're having a discussion. That makes me happy. Okay. So we've talked about a few things, but these are not ordinary times. Right. And so, Mike, your team's written about leadership, and perhaps this professor at Columbia as well for a long time, and they've researched that these are not ordinary times. So the question becomes, this is one of my favorite photos to throw into a slide deck here. In this particular COVID-19 time, what builds trust? Right? How can we demonstrate leadership regardless of our particular circumstances, either with our own teams or with the leaders with whom we work? Or friends or family members with whom we work? How can we support them? And specifically what builds trust? So the first discussion question that I would like to tee up for you is this: what behaviors or practices have you seen that build trust now under these circumstances? Who is doing it well, and what's an indication of that? And then the second question, relatedly, the flip side, what have we seen that erodes trust? So please demute, unmute, and or maybe remute if you've got noise in the background.
So Andrew, it's Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
It's Kathy Hamburger.
Mhm.
So one of the things, I'm going to stay away from politics right now because I think that could be its own discussion group. But having spent quite a bit of time the last few weeks with our clients, there's a huge groundswell of clients that are doing it right. They're really doing it right. So, I won't name names, but, I was on the phone with a client yesterday where they're actually, paying people to take time off if they feel they have to with their kids. There's another clients that are asking people to come back if they feel safe. And if they do feel safe, they're going to pay them extra money to come back. I think there's other leaders that are being honest and really truthful, even though the truth is hard to take, but at least they do it in a very courageous, stable way that speaks to, being calm and that we'll get through this. So those are the things that I've seen that make me feel better. I think there's a lot of cases where everyone's, running out of the house with the house on fire, and they're on fire as well. But I've been very encouraged lately with a lot of companies, corporations that are really building that trust by doing the right thing by their employees.
And if I could just ask, so specifically now, doing the right thing means what? Doing the right thing around, for example, like safety precautions, or you were talking about paying people a little more for?
Yeah, I mean, we have one client, large client, that actually escalated their team bonuses. So their bonuses are usually paid in October, and they paid them all effective May 1st. So, I mean, that's certainly going to build trust, right, by doing that, because they know that people need it. We have another client that is saying, look, we're going to be very slow with asking people to come back, and maybe we will have everyone work at home. There are people that we do need to come back. So if you're willing to come back, we'll pay you an extra $100 to do that. So they're really trying to be sensitive, but also be very caring in this time. Hello? Wow.
I'm not sure who that is, but
Who is that?
I think that might be David Ryan. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, so David, I had to put you on mute because there is something happening where we all of a sudden heard your hold music.
Okay. And Carlin, please check the chat I just sent to you. So yeah, so
Right.
thank you, Kathy. I think that's really a good example of specifically what's helping now. that, and I think it's an application of the principles that we talked about, right? So,
Hello. Sorry,
in terms
Andrew.
of, yes, sir.
Sorry. I just had someone else ringing me to try and get onto the call.
I'm in, David.
Women. Oh, good. Hello, Andrew. I think Kathy's example is great, but I'll just quickly give you one which is the opposite, which in Australia, they've had a stimulus package where people who are on a casual employment basis for greater than 12 months, the government's paying the employers $1,500 a fortnight to actually pay them, even though there's no income. So it's to keep the casuals employed and able to survive. And the cut-off was you had to be employed for 12 months. Someone I know here is retail's about to go back, and they've been given ships as a casual to come back into the workplace. And there's a number of them who have found other jobs, casuals in the middle of all this. Long story short, they've gone back to their bosses and said there's a couple of other workers they know who missed out because they've been employed for only 11 months instead of 12 months. So they're getting no income at all. And they said, why don't you actually give them the ships so they'll have income? And the company's response has been, no, we're only going to get the people who we're getting the government subsidy for to come in. Because obviously for the company, they've made a financial decision. There's no cost for them for them to get, but they've now got this large group of young workers, basically under 25, who have been out of work for 6 to 8 weeks with no income, who could now get income and work in their normal job. And they're refusing to actually use them on the ships, which so not only are they losing those workers who are now out of work and not getting income, but the ones who are actually being asked to work are now becoming very disenfranchised and disengaged because they don't believe the organisation is actually showing that connection and trust in their workers.
Yeah, and so, wow. And I would think that news like that will travel, especially among younger employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that may be something. It'll be interesting to circle back. Let's see if we can connect on that in a few months and see if they really are paying a price for that, because I would expect that will be shared.
Yeah, and I'll just say, the first thing I thought of when this slide came up was Amazon, because there's this erosion of public trust in Amazon right now because of some of what is being reported on by workers and whistleblowers from Amazon.
Right.
And so I think brand-wise, that could be really, really damaging.
Right. And what you're talking about here, Carlin, is my question here originally was, what have you seen that builds and erodes trust among employees? But in this case, you're talking about the public trust in the Amazon brand. So it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Employee trust was the first thing to break down. And then when the employees started talking, then it's the public trust.
Right. Okay. No, interesting. And welcome, Andrew. Because one Andrew is simply not enough.
That's right.
So
that's right. I know a few more. I can text them and see if they want to join if you like.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I would any other responses? Kavita, anything? What have you seen that works, that's working well in building trust, and what hasn't? I'm sorry, you're muted.
Hold on. How's that? Better?
That's better.
Hi,
But it's not better for Kavita. Yeah.
Could you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think what we've done with Brickworks, like we've, obviously tried to keep our employees as safe as possible, and I guess stay in communication with the team and keep communication open and clear. So, you're hearing what's happening on the ground floor, and sort of being a bit more lenient, understanding that people have families and kids and trying to, self-isolate at home, and just being, able to work with them, and, who wants to come back, we've allowed back, and just trying to keep the environment as safe as possible. So Brickworks has been fairly good with all the employees in terms of, through this, and making sure the managers sort of check in daily with their teams, seeing how they're coping, because obviously there's so much uncertainty. at the moment. So just trying to keep everyone positive and keep the
Yeah,
communication.
it sounds to me like that's a demonstration of that ostentatious listening term, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
check in with people. Let's be sure that the communication is heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, I might just add to
Cool.
following on from Kavita, what Kavita had to say. Like, I think that some things that we did very early, we went to, we put temperature control stations at every site early, put as many people at work early. So, you know, even now you can't get on one of our sites, whether you're a customer, a staff, or a supplier, without having a temperature taken. And we did that, you know, weeks and weeks before I think a lot of the restrictions came out. But I recently had recruited a new general manager in Western Australia, and he works for BlueScope not that long ago, and he was there 15 years, and he made a comment because we went straight to, you know, we need, and this is coming from our managing director, Lindsay, we need to talk every day. So every morning at 8 o'clock, he's on Zoom with 40 people, and it's our whole executive team. And Sean sort of made an observation this first week that in 15 years at BlueScope, he might have had three opportunities to talk to the managing director, and in his first week, he's had an opportunity every day to talk directly to him. So communicating a lot, doing everything we can to protect our staff, making sure we put out, you know, made it very public that, you know, we're in a position we can weather this and we're going to do everything we can, and there'll be no immediate layoffs. And we've taken some steps to really shore up our position if things do turn down. And, you know, we've taken factories offline and reduced inventory to put cash in the bank, and knowing that if in our industry building activity drops 50%, if we wait till it drops to try and shore up our stock positions, it'll be too late. So acting really early, communicating a lot, I think has done a lot to build a lot of trust with our teams, and even, you know, consulting with our teams that if someone's got 12 weeks leave and they do this job and someone's got no leave and do a different job, we'll train him to do your job and you take the leave. So all our employees, even though it's not ideal for the employee with 12 weeks to use all his leave while the other person gets to keep working, but we just wanted to make sure people kept getting money in their bank accounts. And all those things worked really well. And I was actually just off the phone. I was a bit late because I was talking to Lindsay this morning about some of the things I'm seeing come out of after the meeting with Lindsay. I have all of my team on Zoom first up, and Kavita's on there with me. And, you know, we would normally meet once a week, and it'd be the masonry team and the precast team and the cement team all separately. But every day, the heads of those businesses are all on Zoom for half an hour, and every day we find something to talk about. And today, one of the guys that runs one of our businesses has found a saving to transfer product from West Coast to East Coast. It's about a 50% cost saving. And the guy that runs our precast business that would never get involved in those discussions because the businesses are different. So we bring some stuff from West to East and we're trying to get a transport, like a viable transport option. So this communication, like never before, is just unbelievable. And I think there's so many exciting new ways to work that will come out of what we're going through. I can't wait to sort of get back to business and do things a bit differently.
Great. Excellent. You know, thank you for sharing that. Terrific. Mel, did you have something? But you need to unmute, please.
In Australia, one of the large non-government organisations that do a lot of social work, many years ago, I became aware that they had about $20 million tucked away in a contingency account. And at the time, I thought, well, that's a lot of money to have tucked away. And now they've been able to keep continuity going and continue to deliver the services to the people in need out on the street and in the community. And as an organisation, I think that just demonstrates great leadership.
Yeah. Well, just the strength to hold those resources for a time when they're really needed.
Yep, for sure.
Yep.
And I just want to say one last thing, Andrew, and that's about the content that's posted in the Inspiring Leadership app. There's a great article around the neuroscience of trust, and looking at, you know, what you said, Andrew Neros, about, you know, people coming up with ideas who wouldn't necessarily be normally working in that discipline. The neuroscience of trust shows that employees who are trusted to think about other things, not just their regular job, it builds trust in a really amazing way. So I think that's exciting as well.
Yep. And I would say, just to chime in on a few examples here of some of what I've seen, So one of my coaching clients runs a call center. She oversees 350 people in a call center in one of our big financial services clients. She's based in New York. And she was responsible for overseeing the transfer of all the technology so people could work from home, which is the first time the company has ever done that. And excuse me, I'm slightly just trying to, thank you. Trying to make that noise go away. Thank you. So these were the people who were getting frantic phone calls from people, you know, when the markets were starting to crash and they were needing to walk some of these people off the ledge, people who were calling, what's happening to my retirement savings? My family is in the room with me because we're all locked down together. What do I do? What do I do? And the need to be both compassionate and present with people on the line, and also do what they do in terms of their metrics and keeping the calls focused and relatively quick according to their standards, and be flexible where they needed to be in terms of those standards, was very important for her to lead in a particular way, in a compassionate way, which I'm glad to say she was doing very well. And one of the things that she was doing well, again, given the context of that role, especially because there's so much the front line, those people. I mean, you don't get more front line than talking to customers who are panicking about their retirement savings in the middle of a pandemic when the markets are crashing 20% in a day. And we talked about how she was making it a point to connect the individual's work to the organization's mission. So this really became mission-focused work for all of those people. And that helped, as she reported back to me, that helped them find a little greater level of resilience because they knew that their work really mattered. It was connected to the mission of the organization, no question about it. That was really helpful for her. And one other story I'd want to tell is I'm coaching a gentleman who is the #2 guy, huge mining company, actually based in Australia, a global mining company. And like you said, we won't name names. When I talked with him about this recently, he said, you know, these are the times when leaders really earn their money. These are the times when we need to step up and be level-headed. People are counting on us. These are the leadership moments. And it's like we either want this kind of attention or we don't. And it's what leadership is all about. And he happens to be a very, his personal faith is very important to him. His values are very clear. He's not preachy, but he gets, look, I have an important job to play here. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to show up strong in this situation. There's a recognition, opportunity to step into what a leader can offer in these times. And I really, really appreciate that, just that attitude and that focus that he's showing under all kinds of stress where, like in many businesses, you're worried about your workforce and you're worried about the customers coming in the door. In the case of mining, there's issues, of course, of different crews in different parts of the world that were getting sick in clusters, in addition to the fact that their demand has just dropped off a cliff. Very, very difficult situation, and yet the conversation is about what are we going to do next? How can we do this? What's the most compassionate way we can behave towards our people? So I just wanted to put that example into the group. And I think that what we're talking about with these examples is a connection between, like you said, Kathy, about giving people the details and giving them, some straight information, and then also caring about them, or a way that might be depicted visually is this way, is this balance. And I think it's so important in leadership, and really not just leadership, anyone on a team working together as we behave as one team member to another. How do we balance not one or the other, but how are both maintained? And one of the things I like about this particular visual is if you favor one over the other, there's David's right. If we favor one over the other, what happens? We're going down. So there needs to be a balance. Yes, there can be from time to time, perhaps it sways from one to the other. It's not always 50-50 exactly. But if it's out of balance, it doesn't work. And we need both. And that's one of the things I like about this particular visual. Any other thoughts about this?
Maybe a little bit more to the heart side sometimes than the.
Yeah. Mhm. Well, and I think that some of the, if we were to go back, I don't want to make you dizzy by reviewing slides, but if we were to go back to some of the principles of trust, for example, so appreciating unique strengths, I think is both heart and head, right? It's both the compassionate piece and a sensitivity, but it's also being clear about the ways to communicate that, the data that supports the fact, like how would you demonstrate to me if I report to you that you appreciate my strengths? You might say, well, you did a good job with respect to this technical thing or this result, and there's data that needs to go in there. It's not a purely emotional report back. There's data, for example, and I think with some of the other factors as well, there's a balance. But I totally agree with you. In a time like this, in particular, where people are emotionally freaking out, there needs to be, or potentially freaking out. Australia's ahead of us here always, so you're not as freaked out as we are still. We've got to catch up to that.
What about the gut? You talk about your gut instinct, Andrew, and where do you see that fitting in here?
Yeah.
That's
Gut instinct is
it
one of
talks
those
to us,
things.
and we don't understand it. We don't understand why it's talking, but we understand there's a reason to trust it.
Yeah. Well, tell me what's prompting your question and what you think about that.
I was sort of find this a little bit. It's like, what's your heart say? What's your head say? What's your gut say? And the gut sometimes, what speaks to you first, and then the other two kick in. And I was just keen to get your thoughts when this picture sort of portrays two of the three, I guess, parts of it, the decision-making process that I think about.
Yeah. No, that's a great. Well, first, I think it also depends on what we're talking about in terms of gut feeling, because I think you're not talking about guts as in courage. And I don't think you're talking about like grit and that piece, which is I think a subject of another webinar where we could go to. But one thing that I might, now that you mention it, if I look at that drawing, right, that baton is going right across that fellow's gut. So perhaps
It's in there, right?
Perhaps it's the gut feeling that triggers the recognition. Wait a minute, my gut tells me that maybe I should be putting a little bit more emotion and hard focus into this communication or into this message or data or the other way around. So I'm totally with you on that. And I think that needs to be honored. And some people I think are stronger at it than others. Some people's gut may not be informative. It may be the equivalent of leadership food poisoning, but I do agree with you that it's important to pay attention to it. And this is where it helps so much that if a team is healthy, we can check these perceptions with one another. I'm getting a feeling maybe this would be a good time to release those funds for this purpose or that purpose. What do you think? Or I'm having a sense, I'm getting a gut feeling, whatever, that if we can check that with each other, I think it's really helpful. And also an indication that the team is level and open and trusting enough that we can have those discussions. That's a great question. I would say that the gut would sometimes be an access point to the two of those, to the head and the heart. But
yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, cool. Great question. Okay, next questions, because we're all about questions. What can you do to help build trust on your team or with your clients? What could you introduce, demonstrate, model, or otherwise contribute? And that means, what are we doing literally on our teams, or if we serve others, how could we do that? And I'd ask you to be as specific as possible. So if we could leave this conversation with some actionable steps, what would those be? What could we do?
I've just unmuted you all.
Thank you, Carlin.
Okay.
See? She's providing trust by unmuting us.
Yeah. Well, I think communication, making sure that you're open and honest and that you're communicating with them frequently, making sure that you show up. It is a stressful time, but there's things you can't control and there's things you can control. So, demonstrate that courage to just show up and be there for them and move on and make sure that you're telling them the truth and that you're communicating often and, staying in touch with them. Mm-hmm. Sorry, David, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're right. I think an important part of this, and talking to many clients, is I think it's important that people understand it's okay to allow people to demonstrate a bit of panic and uncertainty, and to go back to your previous slide, it's okay, and to go to that emotional agility thing where allow them to experience the emotions and then guide them in how they can move forward from that, as distinct from telling everybody it'll be okay, just head down, bum up. That actually doesn't actually address the issues for many people. And also understanding that when you talk to them, as Kathy says, that a lot of people have very different environments to deal with outside the work environment, which now is the same environment. So that some of the things that drive their behaviours are quite fundamental, and you've got to be aware of that as well. Without diving into it, you've got to be aware that some of them have got some significant issues that they're dealing with that many of them have never dealt with before in their life. They've never been in a situation like this, regardless of their age point.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Good.
I think one of the things that you brought up before, Andrew, was Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm still hearing a terrible echo, so I may have to.
But we're not, so maybe you can swap and listen from the other one.
Okay. Hold the line. All right. Do you hear me now?
Perfect.
So one of the things that I think is that you mentioned purpose before, and this idea of going back to mission and purpose. And I think, going back to the values of our company has been very important to me, and it always is. And I think there's that idea of, all right, what are the basics? How do we treat people? How do we contribute to them? Contribution is one of our values. So how do we contribute to our clients when they're frozen? So we have some clients whose budgets are frozen. There's no activity, but we know we want to contribute to them. So we're staying in touch, and we're making sure that they know that we're there to support them. And when they come back, we'll be there too. But there's a consistency of relationship. And I think that's been important for us.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we're not just there when you're flush with cash. Yeah, I don't see flush with cash as one of the primary values of Sloan Group. I haven't seen it. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. Kavita, anything? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I think as a leader, especially in this climate that we're in, I think being present, and I think that has more. It demonstrates to the team that you're actually there, and that can sometimes have more of a better effect than by you not being there.
And so if I could ask right now, like within the past few weeks, what does being present look like in an effective way? What have you seen that, because it's not being in the office with everybody.
No, that's right. It's more so, getting on the Zoom, it's getting on the phone and being there and actually talking to your team. It's being open, it's being available, and just, obviously you can't be in the office with them, but just being there for them, I think has a more positive effect. And people, it sort of puts puts some calm over them. So, and being able to communicate to them that, things will get better, things will be okay.
Yeah, great. So being present, being visible.
Yeah.
If you think about what the opposite would mean, it would be, everybody's under a ton of pressure and he's just not, I don't know where he is. I mean,
that's exactly right. And then if they don't, if you're the leader in your business and you're not being available and no one can communicate to you, obviously it sends people into the thought of what is actually happening. Is there something bad happening? Is there what's going on? No one knows. So their thought goes straight into that negative thinking. So, and just end up in a downward spiral in bad thoughts.
No, great point. Yeah, and this is often an example too, where we sometimes hear this notion that when things are going really well, get out of the way and let people shine. Provide the resources, get out of the way, remove obstacles, get out of the way. You're less visible when things are going really well. Other people taking the credit, etc. But when things aren't going well, I need to be there. I need to be the, whatever it is, taking the heat, for example, being a liaison is needed, and being reachable. And these are the times when people feel the most demanded upon in terms of just timing. And we've heard from many of our clients, we've had internal discussions about this, that our coaching clients, leaders are really struggling with boundaries. I'm not sure if you're finding this in your company where, a Wharton professor did some research and found that the average workday is 2 to 3 hours longer now than it was 2 months ago. Just people are just working longer. There's an expectation that, oh, well, they have a phone, and since we're
I
all
agree.
working on my phone is my office, therefore I'm
Right.
reachable. But that's right now what may be required, especially at a certain level. I mean, yes, there have to be limits. I get that, but we got to be visible. That's a great point. Cool. Okay. David, anything to contribute verbally? Okay. Nope. Okay. So one thing that I would say that's really helpful for building trust now, and just to put it another way, is we cannot physically be present, although, which, like as you said, Kavita, it's just so important to be there and be present. But whatever the equivalent is of lending a hand, and this, by the way, may be a really antiquated notion. At least in the U.S., the head COVID czar in our capital has recently said something like, "Well, shaking hands, I don't know if we'll ever get back to that." So we'll see what happens, culturally with that. But just the equivalent of lending a hand or connecting hands in some way, I think that's at the core of what is needed right now. Something more personal. You need to see someone's face, not just see a text message, although a text is probably better than an email, but it can be overwhelming. Whatever the equivalent is of lending a hand, and whether it's effective is a function of how it's received, not how it's intended, which is something that we often talk about in the coaching world. So what's the best way we can effectively reach out so that it's felt as a helping hand? And what this gives rise to, and Carlin, you were on it a few minutes ago, is what do we stand for? What are our values? And if we think about if we were to survey our teams and say, what is our leaders' values? I think a really interesting time to do a culture survey or a pulse check, or whatever these things are called in our different client organizations, would be, shortly after people get back to work, to whatever extent they will, and say, what does that person stand for? Because their behavior during this time is going to be a demonstration of that. And as I said earlier, it's not what we say, it's what we do. We care about our people. Do you? Because this is the time where that's really tested. And I have a great deal of respect for these people who are putting themselves out there, the leaders who are like this gentleman with the mining company. He's putting himself out there and said, we will make the tough decisions. We're with you. We're available to you. It's almost I hate to use this, it sounds corny, but it really is like a higher calling. We're not just assembling things and managing here. And this is, you want to talk about a difference between managing and leading. It's the people who are doing this well now are leading. And you can manage effectively from a distance. You can't lead effectively without that equivalent of that taking one another's hand. So I think that's critical. Any comments about that? David, you are unmuted. Oh, you just remuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think that's all great points, and we'll get running out of time quickly, but Carl and I had a conversation with a client of ours here the other day, primarily around duty of care. But that particular company, I think Carlin would agree, has the chief people officer talk about what they've done for their people during this crisis, and they'd done a multitude of things, but she could actually identify each action to a value that they had. So they've got from memory 5 values, and she probably listed 20 actions that they'd taken. And about 10 of them were quite unique and outside what they would normally do. But each action was aligned to a value, so that they're actually now running their engagement survey, as you've talked about, which was planned for this time anyway. And so it was a really interesting conversation, and it showed that it wasn't just a off-the-cuff thing. It was, and whilst it was done for all the right reasons, they used their values to guide the decisions on how they did things, including care parcels for employees, providing meals for those who couldn't go home, simple things like that, but a whole range of other stuff they did as well. And so it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. And in addition to connecting to values, or the critical importance of that, it's also highlighting and calling out and acknowledging great performance, acknowledging what people are doing. So it's a wonderful win-win that way. Perfect. Lovely. Yeah. So this is the time where values are, something that I like to say in different leadership contexts is leaders are like tea bags. Their true colors come out when they're in hot water. So here we are. And how is that going to show up? How are people going to remember you? This is the time to think about legacy. And it's a great time to be in the business that we're in. And I feel fortunate every day because this is the time to challenge people and say, okay, how do you want to be remembered? Because they're going to remember this time. That's what I would say. So final question. What's next? What might we do with this information and with these ideas? Which part of this do we think it's important to talk about with our teams or bring back to the leaders that we're supporting? So we just have a couple of minutes. I'd love it if we could all chime in with something that we're taking away from this, either a learning or an awareness or something we're grateful for in what our organization's doing or who we're working with. And as I mentioned, there's always room for continuing the discussion afterwards. Feel free to email me and we'll go from there. Who's first? Yes, sir.
Hear me? Okay, I'll go first because I'm going to have to jump off in a minute and go and run another Zoom webinar. Look, I think it's been fantastic. I love that Google model and also the slide with all the team points on it. In fact, I took a photo of it, and so I can actually plagiarize it and use it for other things. So thank you for that. I think what's next is that emerging need for us to understand how to help people get into the future and what will be their new normal. So one of the things we've learned that have worked well that we can take forward, and it's a conversation we're having with quite a number of our clients, to grasp the opportunity to have our new normal, but understand that not everything that people have been able to do now can go on forever. And as part of that is the ability to operate in such environments for long periods of time. But certainly there's lots of great outcomes from leaders and from the organisations and what they've done. And I think that's the real challenge. How do we capture that, make sure it helps us all be better in the future?
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity for some quality after action review discussions, right? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. Thank you.
On that note, I'll jump off. Thank you very much.
Hey, David.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Good to see you. Kathy? Andrew?
I think we've had a great dialogue. I agree about the leaders showing up. I think your comments were point on. What will people remember? They'll remember people that did show up and people that were there for them. And consistency. I mean, I think these are unprecedented times, and we're just going to have to take it one day at a time. And leadership's going to be paramount. So I think we're going to have plenty of examples of poor behavior and poor leadership. So I think we focus on the good things and try to be that leader that cares and shows up.
Great. Beautiful.
Yeah, I think something sort of I just jotted down, like the David's point just about making people feel comfortable in what the world, what the new normal is going to be, but also point about, because people are going to remember this time, and really, using technology to get to more places, to talk to more people, and talk about building trust. And to me, that's a lot about, and Kavita made a good point about presence and the voices and the things people tell themselves. And I think when there's uncertainty or questions that are being avoided, people feel that uncertainty with negative things as opposed to positive things. And really, so dial up the interactions, try and get to more people, talk to more people, let them ask more questions and give them the answers they need to avoid the mishaps of uncertainty that can occur. Will be definitely some things I take away from today. Really, trying to really connect that mission purpose and what's the important work what's really important about what we do.
Yeah, beautiful. And both of those comments, I think, relate to more communication, increased communication, filling the gaps so there can't be that misperception and that connecting to the mission. Yeah.
Yeah, but not avoiding, everyone's like, what's going to happen? I'm going to lose my job. And don't avoid discussions. You got to just have them front on, and actually giving people the opportunity to come on and give them a forum to ask whatever question they want, and trust that you can talk openly about the reality of these situations, and at least people, whether it might be positive or not, at least they have something that feels that the uncertainty. Even if it's bad, sometimes knowing is worse than not knowing.
Right. Well, right. And truth is better than denial.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of the truth telling at times is not just sharing bad news, but sharing, I don't know. It's a hugely powerful statement always for a leader to say, I don't know, when one doesn't know, because of the way it builds trust. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, we're at time here. Kavita, what would you add?
Okay. You able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, look, I agree with everything that we've discussed, and the one thing that I actually think was good was that appreciate unique strengths. So not everyone's perfect, and what can we do to harness our team's unique strengths and help build trust, help build a better, more effective team. The other thing that I did, which I don't know we didn't spend too much time on, was that the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So that is an actual book, is it? Is it not?
Well, the book is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And there is a team assessment that I often use. That's the 5 Behaviors Team Survey. So the team can evaluate itself on those 5 dimensions.
Yeah, look, I think, I'll talk to Andrew offline about it, but I think it's definitely something that we should look into, especially, everyone's going to slowly start heading back into the office, and, we want to create a really positive environment. So it'd be really good to, while people have been away, and find out what has, what everyone's gone through, personally, because sometimes you may not be able to always get to everyone, but I think it's definitely something to look into for us.
Good. No, great. Lovely. Yeah. And it's a great also demonstration and investment in the culture and the team. So beautiful.
Andrew, I'm just going to have to jump off. I'm sorry, but it was great talking to you all today. I've just got a 10 o'clock meeting I got to jump into.
Thanks for being with us. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you. And I didn't have a chance to say thank you this way when Andrew was still with us, but thank you for jumping in to something that was maybe a little bit more interactive than you may have expected. So I appreciate that willingness to jump into the discussion. That's great. I appreciate that. So
thank you to you, Andrew, for doing this session for us, for making yourself available. And I did want to make one comment about future programming, because every month we're going to unlock new webinars like this on the Inspiring Leadership app. So join us next time. Watch the app for events and workshops, and that is inspiringleadership.io. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Yep.
Thank you, Andrew.
Good to be with you. Have a great day.
Okay, bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.